Kappa was under enormous pressure to mount a successful mission. The credibility of the Abwehr was at stake as he neared the end of the selection process for Operation Pastorius. From the files at the Ausland Institute, Kappa had selected 12 men, all of them apparently loyal Nazis who had lived in the United States. Under Kappa's watchful eye, they began to train for their mission at Gwenz Farm, an Abwehr establishment 40 miles south of Berlin. They were divided into 3 4-man teams, but from the beginning, 2 men stood out. The first was the thin, ferret-faced George Dasch. He had come late to the Nazi Party in 1939, when his mother returned from a trip to Germany full of praise for the Führer and all his works. During his 19 years in America, Dasch had worked as a waiter and was a man of sadly unfulfilled ambitions. Inspired by the feats of the American aviator Charles Lindbergh, who had been the first man to fly solo across the Atlantic, Dasch had made several unsuccessful attempts to become a pilot himself. But unlike Lindbergh, Dasch's ambitions remained firmly earthbound. In spite of all of his efforts, George Dasch had failed to make his way into the comfortable mainstream of American life. In 1940, he had been required to register as an alien. He decided to return to Germany without his wife, who was then in hospital. Dasch arrived in Berlin in May 1941, just before the invasion of the Soviet Union, and at a time when the German home front was beginning to feel the effects of war. But Berlin had not yet been heavily bombed. Dasch got a job monitoring foreign radio broadcasts. In February 1942, he was attached to Abwehr II. Kappa's second man was the good-looking Edvard Curling. He had emigrated to America in 1929 at the age of 20, having already joined the Nazi Party. When Curling married in America, his wife Marie became a party member too. The couple had separated by 1936, when Curling visited Germany to see the Berlin Olympics. Here he met and fell in love with an American woman, Abigail Johnson. The affair ran its course, and Curling found another mistress, a Florida waitress called Hedwig Engelmann. In the autumn of 1939, just after the outbreak of war, Curling and a number of friends bought a yacht, the Lekala, which was anchored in Baltimore, with the vague idea of sailing to the aid of Germany. But the short voyage of the Lekala was watched all the way by the suspicious U.S. Coast Guard service. The American Neutrality Act made the Lekala a suspicious vessel. She was interned at Staten Island in New York, and Curling was ordered to dispose of her. She was eventually sold in Florida. A small victory for the U.S. Coast Guards. Curling sailed for Germany aboard the SS Excordia in July 1940. After a spell at an army listening post on the Channel coast, Curling found a berth in Joseph Goebbels' Ministry of Propaganda in Berlin. In the winter of 1941, he wrote to Abigail Johnson in America, telling her, "We know the power of propaganda well enough to know that you are at present the prey of only a small group of Jews. The time will come when you once more find out that you have been fooled into a war that is not yours." Curling was recruited by Kappa in March 1942. Kappa marked down Curling and Dasch as his potential leaders. At Gwenz Farm, Kappa's team of saboteurs began training. They learned how to blow up railway lines, much as the resistance did in occupied France. They studied explosives in the laboratory. One type was painted black to resemble a lump of coal. Its cavity held the detonator. In an important feature of their training, the saboteurs were taken on tours of German war plants, similar to the targets Kappa and his team had chosen in the United States. They were shown the bottlenecks in each plant, the destruction of which would bring the entire factory to a grinding halt. At none of these plants was any attempt made by Kappa to conceal the nature of his charge's mission. At IG Farben, the tour was interrupted by a 5-star lunch in the director's dining room. The Abwehr had supplied Kappa with an impressive list of targets in the United States. Among them was the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad. This was a prime strategic target. The railroad was a leading coal carrier in the United States, hauling coal from West Virginia and Pennsylvania to steel mills and war materials plants. The saboteurs' high explosive, disguised as coal, might prove deadly in a mountainous defile. The Abwehr's full range of transportation and infrastructure targets in the United States was highly ambitious. They included the Pennsylvania Railroad at Newark, the railroad curves at Altoona, canals and locks on the Ohio River, the New York water supply system, and the Hellgate Bridge. Aluminium was a vital component in aircraft production, which was now leaping ahead in America. It had to be halted. Annual American aircraft output had been a mere 2,000 in 1941. In 3 years, it climbed to nearly 97,000. This was the economic and military power of which Admiral Yamamoto had been so wary. He knew that the most important war of all would be the production war. Accordingly, other targets for the saboteurs were the Aluminium Company of America's huge plants at Alcoa, Messina, East St. Louis, and Philadelphia. The original 12 saboteurs were whittled down to 9. One of them was already well known to Curling. Hermann Neubauer had joined him on the ill-fated voyage of the Lecala. Another one of the team singled out by Kappa was Ernst Berger, whom Kappa had chosen to pave the way for his own arrival in America once the saboteurs had begun their work. The flabby Berger was a former Nazi stormtrooper and street fighter who had emigrated to America, where he became a US citizen. He returned to Germany in 1933 to become an aide to Ernst Röhm, the scar-faced homosexual chief of the stormtrooper movement, the SA. Hitler was now Chancellor, but the SA, 1 million strong and keen to absorb the small German regular army into its own ranks, was fast becoming a destabilizing force. The time had passed when Hitler was happy to shower the SA with flowers. He decided to do away with the SA.